Most people believe explaining themselves is a sign of honesty. Pause. It isn't, because somewhere along the way, you were taught that a good person always explains, a good person always clarifies, a good person always makes sure everyone understands their reasons. So you did it. You explained your choices, your silence, your no, your absence, your success, even your rest. You thought you were being transparent. You thought you were being fair. But here is the truth nobody tells you. The more you explain yourself, the more people assume your decisions require their approval. Think about that for a second. Every time you justify a choice, you are quietly telling the room, I need you to agree with this before it becomes valid. And once people learn that your decisions wait for their approval, they will always find a reason to withhold it. And that's exactly how authority disappears. Not in one dramatic moment, slowly, one explanation at a time, one apology for existing at a time, until the person who used to make quiet, unquestioned decisions becomes the person who has to defend everything all the time to everyone. This video is going to show you why that happens and how to reverse it. If you want more of this, the psychology behind power, confidence, and the people who never ask permission to exist, subscribe now. It costs nothing, and it means you won't miss what comes next. Let's get into it. Every unnecessary explanation quietly tells people that your confidence depends on being understood. That's the core idea we're building this entire video around, not the vague notion of respect, something sharper, something almost uncomfortable to admit. Robert Greene repeatedly shows that power belongs to those who never seek permission to exist. Read his work carefully, and you'll notice a pattern. The people who hold real influence are rarely the ones giving speeches justifying themselves. They are the ones whose presence alone answers the question before it's asked. They don't defend, they don't over-explain, they simply are, and the world adjusts around them. Most of us do the opposite. We explain because we were taught that silence looks arrogant, that justification looks kind, that clarity looks respectful. But underneath all of that lies a quieter transaction. Every time you explain something nobody asked you to explain, you hand over a small piece of your authority. And small pieces, given away enough times, become the whole thing. So here is the thesis this entire video sits on. The moment you start explaining yourself unnecessarily, you surrender psychological power, not your honesty, not your kindness, your power. And once you see how this plays out in relationships, in leadership, in every room you walk into, you will never explain yourself the same way again. Here is the mistake almost everyone makes. Most people explain themselves because they want to avoid conflict. It feels responsible. It feels mature. If I just explain my reasoning, they'll understand, and there won't be tension. That's the story we tell ourselves. But look closer, and the truth is uncomfortable. In reality, they are asking for approval, not understanding. Approval, there's a difference. Understanding is neutral. It doesn't require the other person's blessing. Approval is a transaction. It says, I will feel okay about my decision once you feel okay about it too. And that is a dangerous place to stand, because now your peace of mind is hostage to someone else's opinion. Psychologically, this runs even deeper. People equate excessive justification with insecurity, not consciously most of the time, but instinctively the human brain reads over-explanation as a signal. This person isn't sure. If they were sure, they wouldn't need 3 paragraphs to convince me. The irony is brutal. The more you try to sound confident through explanation, the more insecure you actually appear. Picture 2 managers running the same kind of meeting. One explains every decision, why the deadline moved, why the budget was cut, why someone wasn't chosen for the project, walking the room through every internal debate that led to the outcome. The other simply makes it, states the decision, briefly notes the reasoning if relevant, and moves forward. Which one do people trust more by the end of the quarter? Which one do people quietly start testing, pushing, second-guessing? It's almost always the one who explains too much, because over-explanation invites negotiation, and once a decision is open for negotiation, it was never really a decision at all. Confidence never negotiates. It states, it acts, it moves on. Confidence doesn't need a jury. It doesn't campaign for votes. It simply exists, and the people around it either align with it or they don't. But they rarely challenge it, because there's nothing to challenge. There's no long explanation to poke holes in. But explaining yourself is only the first mistake. There's something even more costly hiding underneath it. We live in a culture obsessed with transparency. People think transparency builds respect. Say everything, justify everything, share your reasoning, your doubts, your process, your motivations. Surely that builds trust, right? Here's the uncomfortable truth. It often creates leverage, not for you, for whoever is listening. Robert Greene puts it plainly across his work on power. Power depends on controlling information. Every fact you reveal about your reasoning is a fact someone else can use to predict you, to pressure you, or to manipulate you the next time a similar situation arises. Psychologically, this is simple but brutal. The more people know, the easier you become to predict. And the easier you are to predict, the easier you are to manage. Not necessarily out of malice. Most people don't even realize they're doing it. But once someone understands exactly what argument moves you, exactly what guilt trip works on you, exactly what explanation will make you cave, they now hold a key to your behavior. Here's a simple example. Someone explains why they said no to a request. Maybe they're overwhelmed. Maybe they feel guilty. Maybe they're worried about disappointing the other person. Now everyone knows how to pressure them next time. They've handed over the exact emotional lever that gets them to say yes. The next request won't just be a request. It will be engineered, consciously or not, to hit that exact soft spot they revealed. And once people know your weaknesses, they don't need to attack you directly. They just need to wait and press gently in the places you've already shown them are soft. There's a belief so common it barely gets questioned. Talking equals confidence. The person who talks the most, explains the most, fills every silence. Surely they're the one in control of the room. Actually, the opposite tends to be true. Silence creates uncertainty. And here's the key insight. Humans fear uncertainty far more than they fear a firm answer. When someone talks constantly to fill space, the room can read them almost instantly. Their intentions, their anxieties, their next move. There's no mystery, so there's no weight to their presence. But when someone stays quiet, especially in a moment where explanation is expected, something shifts. The room doesn't know what they're thinking, and not knowing creates a kind of gravity. People lean in. People pay more attention, not less. Picture two people receiving the same piece of harsh criticism in a meeting. One argues, defends every point, explains context, tries to correct the record in real time. The other simply smiles, nods, and lets the moment pass without a rebuttal. Which one controls the room in that moment? It's almost always the one who didn't need to respond. Their silence didn't read as weakness. It read as unbothered, and unbothered in a room full of people scrambling to justify themselves looks like power. This doesn't mean silence is always the answer, or that explanation is always weakness. But silence is often the strongest answer, especially in moments where an explanation would only feed the tension instead of ending it. Here's a trap that looks like diligence but is actually self-sabotage, trying to convince everyone, trying to get full agreement before moving forward, trying to make sure not a single person in the room has doubts about your choice. It feels responsible. It is actually corrosive. The more you defend, the less conviction you appear to have. Every additional argument you offer in defense of a decision signals subtly that the previous argument wasn't enough. And if the first reason wasn't enough, why would the fifth one be? Robert Greene's observation applies directly here. Power speaks through certainty, not through volume, not through the number of justifications stacked on top of each other, through the simple, steady presence of someone who has already decided and isn't looking for a second opinion on something they've already settled internally. Contrast a successful leader with a people pleaser in the exact same situation. Both face pushback on a decision. The leader acknowledges the pushback, restates the decision briefly, and moves the conversation forward. The people pleaser starts explaining, then re-explaining, then adding new justifications as the pushback continues, effectively negotiating in real time. One person leaves the room having reinforced their position. The other leaves having slowly dismantled it, one explanation at a time. But there's an even bigger mistake hiding underneath all of this, one that has nothing to do with what you say and everything to do with how you feel while you're saying it. Here's where most people lose control without even realizing it. Explaining yourself while emotional, not calm, measured explanation, reactive explanation, the kind that comes out fast, defensive, a little too loud, a little too fast. Psychologically, emotion exposes insecurity in a way words alone never could. It doesn't matter how logical your explanation is if your voice is shaking, if you're talking faster than usual, if you're repeating yourself because you're trying to convince yourself as much as the other person. People read tone far more accurately than they read content. Picture this: someone insults you, directly or subtly, in front of others. You immediately defend yourself, fast, emotional, maybe even a little desperate to correct the record. In that exact moment, before you've even finished your sentence, they already won. Not because their insult was clever, because your reaction proved it landed. You handed them the exact confirmation they were looking for. Calm is power, not because emotion is bad, or because you should suppress how you feel, but because the person who can absorb a hit without an immediate, visible reaction keeps something the reactive person gives away instantly: unpredictability and control over the pace of the interaction. If this is landing for you so far, drop a comment with the one line that hit hardest and hit like before we continue. It genuinely helps this reach more people who need to hear it. Now let's keep going, because the next part changes how you think about reputation entirely. Here's another quiet trap: trying to control opinions, trying to manage what people think of you through words, clarifying, correcting, softening, adjusting your image in real time based on every comment or reaction you get. The truth is simpler than that, and far more durable. Reputation is built by consistency, not commentary. You cannot talk your way into being trusted. You can only behave your way into it over time, in ways that don't require narration. Psychologically, this makes sense the moment you notice it in your own life. People believe behavior, not explanations. You can tell someone 100 times that you're reliable. It means nothing compared to the one time you showed up exactly when you said you would, without announcing it. Think of someone in your life who always keeps promises, the friend who shows up, the colleague who delivers what they said they'd deliver, the person whose whose word has simply never needed backup. Nobody questions them, not because they're persuasive talkers, because their pattern has already answered every question before it's asked. Actions eliminate the need for explanations. Every time you act consistently, you're making a deposit into a kind of account that speaks for you later, in moments when words would only dilute what your behavior has already proven. Here's the mistake that ties every previous chapter together: needing everyone to understand you, needing agreement, needing validation before you can feel settled in your own choices. The truth underneath it is almost freeing once you sit with it. The less validation you need, the harder you are to control. Every person who requires constant approval has, without realizing it, handed a remote control to everyone around them. Withhold approval and you can steer that person's mood, their choices, even their sense of self-worth. Robert Greene captures this in a single line worth remembering: freedom begins where approval ends. Not approval from your enemies, approval from anyone, including the people who love you most and mean you no harm at all. The need itself is the vulnerability, regardless of who's on the other side of it. Picture the simplest example: walking away instead of arguing. Someone challenges you, pushes for a reaction, wants an explanation you don't owe them, and instead of supplying it, instead of staying to win the exchange, you simply walk away. No justification, no final word. That single quiet act does more to protect your position than any argument could, because it shows, instead of tells, that your peace was never actually up for negotiation. There is only one final lesson left, and it pulls everything we've covered into a single, simple pattern you can carry with you starting today. Let's bring it together, piece by piece, the way it actually builds in real life. Stop seeking approval. That alone changes how you enter every room, every conversation, every decision. Speak less, because every unnecessary word is an opportunity for someone to find a lever to pull. Reveal less, because information given away freely becomes information used against you later. Stay calm, because emotional reactions are the clearest signal of where your armor is thin. Protect your decisions, because a decision that's constantly re-explained was never really settled in the first place. Act consistently, because your behavior over time will always speak louder and last longer than your words. And when you put all of that together, something happens that most people spend their whole lives chasing without ever naming it directly. You become psychologically untouchable. The most powerful people are not the ones who always have an answer. They are the ones whose confidence never depends on being understood. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you stop asking the world for permission to exist. And that is the moment people begin to respect you, not because you demanded it, but because you simply stopped needing it. If this changed even one thing about how you see yourself in a room full of people, leave a comment and let me know which chapter hit the hardest. And if you haven't already, hit like before you go. It's a small thing that helps this reach the people who need to hear it next. And if you want to go even deeper into this exact idea, there's a video on your screen right now that takes it further. Go watch that one next.